All right. Well, I'm really glad that you're here. We have a small group today. And you know what pastors always think? That means that they must have botched it up last week because nobody came back. But someone keeps telling me, no, the summer times and fall, people's schedules are just all over the map. What can you do? So last week we finished chapter 21. Today, I always say this, I'm almost never right, but today I really do think we are going to finish the whole chapter. So I'm going to go through it fairly quickly and with a minimum of comments, and we'll see if we can do some wrap up at the end. Does that sound good?
Yep.
All right. Chapter 22. Now, we should just probably rehash from last week. Remember, Paul was seen in the temple, and some other Jews there who had come probably from Asia or Ephesus remembered that they recognized Paul, and they remembered that he had been traveling with Trophimus, who was a Gentile. So they just assumed that he had they know that he is causing trouble with the Jewish religion. He's being accused of teaching people not to follow the law, and so they assumed that he must have broken their regulations by bringing this non-Jew Trophimus into the temple area. So they grab him and they start beating him up. And the Romans, who have their fortress right on the edge of the temple ground so they can see what's going on, they see a big commotion and disturbance, and they send the soldiers down there. The soldiers kind of grab Paul and rescue him. As they're bringing him back to the Roman fortress and they're going up the steps, Paul tells the tribune, hey, can I talk to the people? And tribune figures, oh, all right. So this is now his address to the people. So you can picture him, he's like standing up on the stairs somewhere of the Fortress Antonia, speaking down into the court of the Gentiles, where there's a whole crowd of the Jews that are all upset about what's going on and all in a riotous mood. All right, so he starts in verse 1. Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you. So he wants to talk to them and defend himself and explain things to them. Verse 2, and when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they became even more quiet. I'm not quite sure why, but just about every commentator I checked says that he's speaking in Aramaic. So Aramaic is very similar to Hebrew. Aramaic was probably the more conversing language that they used at the time. So I think he's probably speaking here in Aramaic. In fact, it's in our footnotes, right? You see that? So that's the language that they're used to. So when you hear someone speaking to you in your own tongue, now they can listen and become more attentive to what he's saying. He's giving his defense. Verse 3, I am a Jew, born of Tarsus in Cilicia, we've looked at that before, but brought up in this city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God as all of you are this day. So what's he trying to establish right up front? Yes, he's being accused of teaching people not to follow the Mosaic law. He's trying to establish, no, I'm just as Jewish as you are. I was born in a different place, but from early on as a kid, I came here to the school of Gamaliel. So he grew up in Jerusalem, learning from one of the most esteemed rabbis of the time, following all the laws, and zealous for God as all of you are this day. Was Paul zealous for God? Yeah. We'll just pause here and look up a couple other scriptures real fast. Go to Galatians chapter 1. Galatians 1. Would someone read verses 13 and 14?
For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers.
All right, so he was, so in the Marines they would have said he's so gung-ho for Judaism. He wants to be number one in his class. He was really committed to being zealous, being all out. I mean, we have the same things today in every religion, right? There's some people who are all very zealous for the Lutheran faith, and you can find people who are zealous for the Catholic faith and zealous Muslim. He was a zealous Jew. Let's look at one other passage, though, too, before we go on. Romans chapter 10. Romans 10. Would somebody read verses 1 and 2?
Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge.
All right, so he's praying there for his fellow Israelite people. And he says, he prays for them. He wants them to be saved. He doesn't see them as enemies in this, at least in this perspective. Because they have zeal for God. They're excited to serve God. They're all about being God's people, but not according to knowledge. They're zealous for the wrong thing. I'm always telling stories. Now I won't finish if I start doing this. I had a time in my training. I'm not going to say specifics because I don't know who will hear this, and I'm not trying to hurt people. But somebody that I worked under, looked up to, and respected, got very angry with me about something that he said I was teaching that was wrong. He didn't understand fully what I was teaching. He heard me say a few words and phrases, and he automatically assumed things about it that were not true. And he got very angry at me, and especially now I can handle getting angry with me, you know. All right. But especially when I was younger, I didn't like people to yell at me. That bothered me, you know. I wanted to please people and wanted them to be happy. So if someone got on my case, it really troubled me. But worse than that, he did it in front of a whole bunch of other people. It was really bothered my conscience and my soul. And I ended up going to another pastor. So this was not the pastor I was working with, but a different pastor, and talking to him about it. He gave me very good counsel, but he also just calmed me down. He said, "Tim, do you know what evil is?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." He says, "You know what evil is? Evil is passionate ignorance." Think about that, passionate ignorance. When you are all gung-ho about something, but you don't really know what the truth, or what you're fighting for. You're fighting for the wrong thing. Think about all the cases of evil that you've known in history, how they may have expressed that. Well, that's the situation with the Jews, and that was the situation with Paul at this time. So back in Acts 22 now, in verse 4, I persecuted this way. In the English, the way is capitalized. So what is the way? Christianity, right. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear witness. From them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus to take those also who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. All right, so when he says that the elders and the high priest can bear witness, he's talking about the elders and the high priest from that time. So this is 20 years ago. So he's talking here about what happened to him 20 years before. But you remember the story of how he was imprisoning people who were following Christ, and then he's traveling to Damascus with special letters from the high priest allowing him to arrest and bring for imprisonment those who are following Christ in Damascus. So that's how gung-ho he was about this, that he thought he's got to stop the people that are following the way. Verse 6. As I was on my way and drew near to Damascus, about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me. Now, this story we've read before, haven't we? Remember, this is the story of Paul on the road to Damascus. So we read this in Acts chapter 9. And as somebody said, I don't forget this, I like this, where God knocked Paul off his high horse. But one of the interesting things about it is he's retelling the story. So in chapter 9, it's being narrated. Luke is telling the story. Here's Paul, in his own words, telling this story to this Jewish audience. And guess what? Later on in the book of Acts, we're actually going to read this story a third time. Because he's going to retell the story of the road to Damascus to King Herod Agrippa. And so 3 different times the story gets told. And so like any time when a story is getting repeated, for example, the Gospels, in the Bible we have 4 Gospels, right? What are they?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay, good. Why don't we just have 1? Why do we need 4? They're all telling the same story of Jesus and his ministry, death and resurrection, but they're all telling it from a different perspective. And so each one is going to bring out different things about it, and that makes the story richer and better by doing that. So the same here, we have the story of Paul on the road to Damascus being told 3 times, but they're not word for word the same. Each one's just a little different, and you learn more things and see different angles and perspectives by looking at all of them. So here we discover what time of day did this light from heaven hit him? Noon. We didn't know that before. What would be significant about having the light hit you at noon?
It's the brightest light.
Yes. So could this have just been like, the cloud went by or something and a little bit of light? This is the brightest time of day. So this light from heaven has to be brighter than the sunlight at noon. This had to be a really bright light. Right? In fact, we know it blinded him, but that's an extra detail of the story. Verse 7, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. But this is the only place where it mentions Nazareth, too. The other 2 stories, he said, I'm Jesus, but here we know Jesus of Nazareth. Verse 9, now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. So they all saw the light, but Paul was in the light, so he's blinded. And in the first account, it tells us that they heard a sound. So we know that the people around him heard a sound, but they couldn't make out of the sound what the words are. That's what we discover from this part of the story. Verse 10, and I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all that is appointed for you to do. And since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me, and came into Damascus. Verse 12, and one Ananias, a devout man, according to the law, well spoken of by all the Jews who lived there. So, here we're getting more details about Ananias. What do we learn about Ananias? That he was a devout Jew, that he followed the law, that he was well spoken of by all the Jews. So he was highly respected as a very faithful and serious and earnest Jew. Why would it be important for him to put those details in this part, this story, this telling of the story?
They were questioning him following the law.
Yes. Who's he talking to, remember? He's talking to the Jews who were upset that he wasn't following the law. So he's adding all these details about the guy that came to him, that the Lord sent to him, was a firm, strict, solid Jew. That's important. Verse 13, he came to me and standing by me said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very hour I received my sight and saw him. And he said, the God of our fathers appointed you to know his will and see the righteous one and to hear a voice from his mouth. For you will be a witness for him to everyone of what you have seen and heard. And now why do you wait? Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name. Okay, most of what Ananias is saying to Paul there is not in the story in chapter 9. So we're getting more details about what Ananias told him. And there's more emphasis here really on Ananias telling him this. In the other story, there's more emphasis on what Christ told him. So why would this story focus more on Ananias? Again, remember it's his Jewish audience. He's, another devout Jew is the one that told me these things. Let's just go to that story for a moment. Acts chapter 9. Verses let's look at verses 15 and 16. Would someone read those?
But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name.
All right, who's he talking to? That's God or the Lord talking to Ananias. So in the chapter 9 version, the focus is on the Lord telling Ananias, no, I've chosen Paul, and Paul's going to be my witness. But here in the chapter 22 version, we know that Ananias apparently related that stuff to Paul. So it's Ananias telling him, no, the God of our fathers has appointed you. You're going to be a witness to everyone of what you have seen and heard. So the same kind of content, but coming from Ananias rather than what the Lord said to Ananias. Look also at back in chapter 22, verse 16. And now why do you wait? Rise and be baptized. And what happens when you're baptized? Wash away your sins, calling on his name. I get such a charge out of this. When you read certain commentaries about this and how they'll get to this point and they'll say, and then Paul was told to go and be baptized as a symbol of the washing away of his sins. And they just say that and keep going. And you just have to look at what it says there. Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins. How are the sins washed away? The means is the sacrament of baptism. So the sacrament is not a symbol of something else. It's the thing itself, the way by which God's promise of this washing comes to us. All right. Verse 17. When I had returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance. Okay, now this is something. Here's some new information. Now we know that Paul, from chapter 9, that Paul went from Damascus back to Jerusalem again after this happened. But now we discover that while he's there in Jerusalem, shortly after the road to Damascus, that he had a vision. I don't like those words. That's kind of weird in English. Fell into a trance. When you think of someone in a trance, right? You think of somebody like in a seance or something. But it's a way of describing that the Lord gave him a vision. Several of the people that comment on this, it reminded them of Isaiah. Remember Isaiah in chapter 6, I think it is, where he was in the temple and all of a sudden he had a vision of the Lord in the temple with the cherubim and seraphim flying around. So this is one of the ways that God communicates with specially chosen vessels of him. that he gives them this powerful vision. How many of you were here when Pastor Hashem was here? That was such a good Sunday school. I'm really glad that he taught that. I think he asked me, he said, do you want me to teach like on the lessons of the day or something? I said, no, teach on whatever's like on your heart, whatever you think. I'm so glad I told him that. Because if you weren't here, he chronicled and he had some videos for us which brought it even more dramatically of something that's going on today in the world, that there are reports by thousands and thousands, maybe it's in the hundreds of thousands, who knows, how do you count this? But Muslims are having dreams and visions where Jesus is coming to them. It's happening all over, in all different countries. It's very widespread. And it's happening to people who don't want anything to do with Jesus. And I've been hearing stories like this for years. And so he was chronicling some of that and what's going on. Very powerful. It's one of the ways that God chooses to speak with selected messengers of his. So don't think of this as like people in a seance or not having sex. This is just a very powerful way that the Lord comes to some people. And so the Lord came to Paul in this way. And obviously that was not unusual for the Jews then. Like the story of Isaiah and the prophecy of Joel, that was an accepted thing that the Lord would speak in visions to people. Okay, verse 18. I saw him saying to me, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And so the Lord's telling him to leave. Paul argues back with God. That's kind of funny, isn't it? If you had a vision and the Lord appeared to you, would you argue with him? So he argues back, verse 19. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that in one synagogue after another I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed, I myself was standing by and approving and watching over the garments of those who killed him. So do you remember that? When Stephen, the first martyr, was killed and they laid their garments at the feet of a man named Saul. So he's thinking, no, they know I'm really zealous for following the Lord. So when they see that I've changed, they must realize that it's for a very good reason, and it's because it's grounded in the truth somehow. Paul thinks he should be able to stay. Verse 21, the Lord said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. So God's plan for Paul was not primarily to witness there in Jerusalem, but to be a vehicle for bringing the gospel to the Gentile world. That's what he's famous for even to this day. That's what we've been studying in his missionary journeys. Look at verse 22. Up to this word, they listened to him. But as soon as he mentions the Gentiles, God is sending me to the Gentiles, how do they react? Then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. It sounds like the radical, progressive, transgender people today. Those of us who are Christians, hey, we should just kill all those Christians. So they get so upset. They're so angry at him. And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, this is in the temple grounds, so I'm sure all the stones have been collected. You can't have millions of people trampling through there, stumbling over stones. Stones are all gone, but they're grabbing the dust and throwing. This is a crazy reaction, isn't it? They're flipping out here, these folks. That's how upset they get from this. Verse 24. The tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. All right. So it's quite possible. I guess we don't know for sure. So it's quite possible, probably probable, that the tribune, who was the Roman military leader, he doesn't know Hebrew. This is his military assignment. So Paul is talking to all these people in Hebrew, and then they flip out, and they're on the verge of having a riot. So the tribune brings them back in, and he wants to figure out, all right, what did he say that is causing these people to go ballistic like this? Obviously, from the tribune's perspective, that's the last thing he wants. He wants people to calm down and relax. And this guy got them all stirred up. Maybe he's trying to start a riot. Maybe he's trying to start a rebellion. Get everybody. He doesn't know what Paul said. So he figures, I'm gonna get it out of Paul, and I'll do it by flogging him. So how do the Romans extract information? Through torture. Now, remember that there were different kinds of floggings back in these days. The one kind, and I can't remember what the Greek word for it is off the top of my head, but it's basically like a rod, or like a long straight stick, and they would beat you with that. That is very similar. Do you remember years ago when there was that American in Singapore?
Caning.
Yeah, caning. It's like caning. He was a hooligan and he did something wrong, and the penalty in Singapore was caning. And when he found out, he's like, "Whoa, wait a minute! I'm an American." It's too bad. That would not be pleasant. You can imagine someone with a long, skinny rod smacking your back. That was very common back in that day. And Paul himself mentions in the book of Corinthians, we won't look it up, but he actually received the rod 3 times in his life. And the Jews, when they would cane somebody, well, I like that word, we'll just call it that. When they would cane somebody, they were prohibited from giving more than 40 lashes. So they would typically give 39. So you can imagine getting hit 39 times by one of these things. Paul mentions how he received a multitude of lashes when he was caned, meaning that he probably got more than 40. Why? Because the Romans didn't have to keep it below that. The Romans could go above 40. So he probably received more than that. Now he mentions he was caned 3 times. I don't know that we know all 3 of those times, but we do know one of them. Does anyone remember? We've already seen it in Acts, when he was beaten with the rod. It was in Philippi. Remember when they took him into prison in Philippi, and they beat him with the rod? And then when he was in prison, and the Lord gave him that jailbreak, remember that? And it was after the Philippine jailer was going to kill himself, and Paul said, "No, don't kill yourself, we're all here." Then remember the Philippine jailer said, "What must I do to be saved?" And he became a Christian. And what did he do? He tended Paul's wounds. Meaning, what had happened after they caned him? They just threw him in jail. Didn't even do anything for it. So it's now, it's afterward, now that this jailer has become a Christian, that he's tending Paul's wounds. So that must have been an awful thing. And remember too that it was then that Paul said, remember they took Paul before the council, and he said, "Is this what you do, to Roman citizens?" So when did he disclose that he was a Roman citizen in Philippi? After he was caned. So it was illegal for them to cane him. And he didn't say anything. He let them do it. And it was only afterward that then he claimed his privilege as a Roman citizen. And they were all afraid, and they asked, "Oh, please just go away, we're sorry." Very, very interesting. But this particular occasion, where now the tribune at the fortress is about to flog him, the word for flog here is derived from the same word as another form of flogging that was done by the ancient Romans, where they didn't use a cane. They had leather straps tied to a wooden piece or something, and then tied within those leather straps would be little pieces of metal or bone. So the idea was, as those straps would hit you, the bone and the metal would rip into your flesh, and as you pull it, they like rip your flesh out. Did anybody see the movie the Passion of the Christ? All right, that horrible bloody scene, which you almost can't watch, it's so bad. that is using that higher form of flagellation. With Jesus receiving that, Matthew says that he was flogged, and Matthew's word for flog there is also a word that looks like it's derived from the instrument itself, the device that they flogged with. And so a lot of people think that Jesus was flogged that way, with the things that had the bone and the metal, like in the Passion of the Christ. So a lot of people think that's what he received. I have also read from other people that they think it had to be the caning, because the other form with the flagellation, that is so gruesome that people usually died after that. So they don't think that he could have received 39 of those lashes and then still been crucified for 6 hours. He wouldn't have lived. So I don't know which is true. I'm not sure. But Paul has been caned before, but now the punishment he's going to receive is with this flagellation. So now he speaks up first. Look at that. Verse 25. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" Now he discloses before that he's a Roman. It's illegal for them to give this punishment to a Roman. When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." It's like, stop! So the tribune came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "I bought this citizenship for a large sum." Paul said, "But I am a citizen by birth." So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately. And the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him. So Roman citizens obviously had very special privileges. You could be a Roman citizen by being born from a Roman citizen, if you're a child of one in year one, or you could buy it like this tribune did if you had enough money, or a lot of times people that did special service, like if you were especially valiant in military service, or you served in the military for a long, long time, they would give you Roman citizenship as your reward. So Paul was born a Roman citizen, so we don't know for sure, but in all likelihood, his father must have done some sort of service by which he gained Roman citizenship. So the tribune who bought his Roman citizenship, you can see he's looking at Paul going, "I paid a lot of money for this. You don't look that rich. You don't look rich enough to have paid for this." That's what Paul says. I didn't pay for it. I was born a citizen. And now the tribune is scared because he was just about to punish someone, which is against the law. So it was a Roman citizen there, right? Verse 30, but on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet. And he brought Paul down and set them before him. So he's still trying to figure out, why are we having these riots? What's the big disturbance about? So he's going to try to get them all together. That's how minds think, right? Well, if let's just all get together. We'll just talk this thing out. So he wants to find out what's going on with it. He just doesn't understand it at all. Now, just a couple closing remarks on this. We went through the whole chapter, partly because this is a really interesting chapter, and it's telling us a lot of history and a lot of what was going on. This would make great movie, right? But homiletically, what does it mean? What's the point of all of this? It's very hard, actually, to find. I always like to read several sermons on stuff I'm going to teach on, just to see how different pastors or theologians handle a certain text. Very few sermons on this chapter, very few. It doesn't lend itself very much to a sermon. So what lessons can we draw from it, or larger things can we take away from it? So a couple, maybe, if it's okay. Now I'm over time. Can I just go 1 or 2 more minutes? One is that Paul, whereas before when he was caned, he did not say anything about his Roman citizenship until afterward. Here, he does. in order to avoid being killed with this flagellation. That, I think, lets us know that if we have, as Americans, we have civil rights, we have the First Amendment protections. Are we going against God to fight back against our government and try to protect ourselves based on the First Amendment? Or should we just go, all right, I'm just like Christ, do whatever you want to me, you know, it's okay, I just will suffer and die for Jesus? Or are there times where it's okay to stand up for your rights? There are times where it's okay to stand up for your rights. So like, you keep hearing these stories about the bakery and the photographer. You don't know what I'm talking about there? And they're being penalized because they won't give their services for gay weddings. And the ones who are fighting them, why would they care? Why don't you just go get another bakery? Because it's not about the cake, right? You know that. It's about punishing people in the public square so that everyone else is afraid and they give in and they stop saying anything about it. So can we stand up for our rights? Yeah, yes, we should. Secondly, I think, again, in the larger sense, I've said before, the Holy Spirit is superintending all of this. And so what we are seeing is Paul giving opportunity after opportunity to bear witness. So here he just had a chance to share with a whole bunch of people out loud in a big forum. And he's going to be able to share in the next chapter with the Sanhedrin, the council. And he's going to be able to share later with King Herod Agrippa. And he's going to be able to share with Governor Felix in the court. And eventually he's going to go to Rome where he shares there. So what we're seeing is the Holy Spirit orchestrating these opportunities for Paul to share the faith and share his testimony. And so you too, who has a responsibility to witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ? Every one of us, right? So you want to be looking for those opportunities where the Lord opens a door for you to be able to share something about Christ. And what can you share? Well, the more you know, the more you come to Bible study, the more you read the Bible, the broader the things are that you're able to draw from and share with somebody else. But what do you need? What's all that you need? Just your basic testimony, right? Paul is just telling what happened to him. This is what happened to me. And this is how Christ got a hold of my life. That's what he's sharing. If you can tell somebody about that, that's very powerful. And you know what's the other thing? No one can refute that. They can say, oh, I think you're full of it, or I think that's stupid, or I don't believe it. But if you're saying, this is what happened to me, how can they argue with that? That's what happened to you is what happened to you, right? So there's some great value here to see how Paul is evangelizing and witnessing. All right, thank you everybody for letting me keep you a few minutes late. And God's grace be with you. We hope to see you again next week.